It was a moment that would change everything. A chance encounter between a Hollywood legend and a man who had lost everything. When a struggling veteran approached Clint Eastwood on a quiet morning in Carmel-by-the-Sea, he expected nothing more than a few dollars to buy a meal. What he got instead was a lifeline, a second chance, and a lesson in resilience that would stay with him for the rest of his life. This is the story of how one small act of kindness can ripple outward, transforming lives in ways no one could have predicted. The setting asterisk. The sun was just beginning to rise over the rugged coastline of Carmel-by-the-Sea, California, casting a golden glow across the crashing waves. The air was crisp, carrying the salty scent of the ocean, and the town was still quiet, save for the occasional cry of a seagull or the distant bark of a dog. On a weathered bench overlooking the water sat Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, his trademark squint fixed on the horizon. At 92, he still carried the same quiet intensity that had made him an icon. Dressed in a simple flannel shirt and jeans, he looked like any other local, though his presence was unmistakable. Passers-by glanced his way, some whispering to each other, but most respected his solitude. A few yards away, a man stood near the edge of the boardwalk, his posture stiff, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn jacket. His face was lined with the kind of weariness that comes from years of hardship. His name was Jack Miller, and he had once been a Marine, but that felt like a lifetime ago. Now, he was just another face in the crowd, another man trying to survive another day. His boots were scuffed, his beard unkempt, and his eyes carried the weight of too many battles, both on the battlefield and off. Jack had been living in his car for the past 6 months, ever since the VA benefits he'd been counting on fell through. He'd tried to find work, but the jobs were scarce, and his PTSD made it hard to hold anything down. That morning, he'd mustered the courage to ask for help. He wasn't proud of it, but pride didn't fill an empty stomach. As he scanned the park, his eyes landed on Clint Eastwood. At first, he hesitated. What could a man like that possibly care about someone like him? But desperation has a way of eroding pride. Taking a deep breath, Jack approached the bench. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir, could you spare a few dollars? Just enough for a meal." Clint turned slowly, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Jack's. For a moment he said nothing, and Jack wondered if he'd made a mistake. But then Clint gestured to the empty spot beside him. "Sit down," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Let's talk." Jack hesitated. This wasn't how these things usually went. Most people handed over a few dollars and walked away, if they acknowledged him at all. But there was something in Clint's tone, a quiet authority that made Jack obey. He sat down, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched the edge of the bench. "What's your name?" Clint asked, his gaze steady. "Jack," the man replied, his voice rough. "Jack Miller." Clint nodded, as if filing the name away. "You served, didn't you?" Jack blinked surprise. "Yeah, Marines. 2 tours in Afghanistan." Clint's expression softened, just a fraction. "I've played a lot of soldiers in my time. Cowboys, too. Detectives, boxers, but the soldiers, they always stayed with me. You boys carry a lot. Too much. Sometimes." Jack looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. "Yeah, well, not much call for soldiers back here. Not when the fighting's done." Clint leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he studied Jack. "You ever think about what comes next?" Jack let out a bitter laugh. "Next? I'm just trying to make it through today." Clint shook his head. "That's not a plan, Jack. That's survival. You need a plan, something to build on." Jack felt a flicker of frustration. "Easy for you to say. You've got everything. I've got nothing. Clint's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Jack thought he'd cross a line. But then Clint leaned forward, his voice low and steady. You think I've always had everything? You think I don't know what it's like to start with nothing? I grew up during the Depression, kid. I know what it's like to go to bed hungry, to wonder if tomorrow's going to be any better. But I'll tell you this. It's not about how hard you fall. It's about whether you're willing to get back up. Jack stared at him, the words hitting harder than he expected. He wanted to argue, to say that it wasn't that simple, but something in Clint's eyes stopped him. There was no pity there, no judgment, just a quiet understanding. Clint reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Jack. This is a buddy of mine. He runs a program for vets. They'll help you get back on your feet, job training, housing, whatever you need. But it's up to you to take the first step. Jack took the card, his hands shaking. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice cracking. Clint's expression softened. Because someone did it for me once, and I wouldn't be sitting here if they hadn't. Jack looked down at the card, the name and address blurring as tears welled in his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of something he thought he'd lost, hope. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Jack. He called the number on the card and was greeted by a warm, reassuring voice on the other end. The program, run by a retired Army colonel named Mike Harper, was exactly what Jack needed. They helped him find temporary housing, provided counseling for his PTSD, and even connected him with a job at a local auto repair shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it gave him a sense of purpose. As the months passed, Jack began to rebuild his life. He moved into a small apartment, started saving money, and even reconnected with his estranged sister. The road wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of his past threatened to crush him. But he kept going, fueled by the memory of that morning on the bench with Clint Eastwood. One evening, as he sat in his apartment, Jack pulled out the worn business card Clint had given him. He thought about writing the legendary actor a letter, to thank him for the kindness he'd shown that day. But before he could put pen to paper, he realized something. Clint hadn't done it for the thanks. He'd done it because it was the right thing to do. And that, Jack realized, was a lesson worth carrying forward. Months later, Clint received a letter in the mail. It was simple, written on plain stationery, but the words were heartfelt. Jack thanked him for the kindness he'd shown that day and for the second chance he'd been given. He wrote about the progress he'd made, the job he'd found, and the hope he'd rediscovered. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted Clint to know that his gesture had made a difference. Clint read the letter carefully, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer where he kept other mementos from his life. For Clint, it was never about recognition or gratitude. It was about paying forward the compassion he'd been shown when he needed it most. Years later, Jack became a mentor at the Veterans Center, sharing his story and offering encouragement to others who were struggling. He often thought about that morning in Carmel-by-the-Sea, and the man who had taken the time to see him as more than just another face in the crowd. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the greatest transformations. The bench in Carmel-by-the-Sea remained a quiet spot, a place where people came to watch the waves and reflect. But for Jack and Clint, it would always be more than just a bench. It was a reminder of the power of human connection and the ripple effect of a single act of compassion. And for those who hear their story, it serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of hope. Clint Eastwood's life had been shaped by moments of kindness, and he knew the value of paying it forward. Jack's journey was a testament to the impact one person can have on another, and how a simple gesture can change the course of a life. Their story is a reminder that no matter how far we fall, there's always a way back. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in us. If this story moved you, don't forget to share it. Together, we can keep spreading stories that remind us of the power of compassion, resilience, and second chances. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the greatest transformations. Years after their encounter, Jack continued to thrive. He became a pillar of his community, helping other veterans find their footing and rebuild their lives. He often spoke about that fateful morning in Carmel-by-the-Sea, and how a simple conversation with Clint Eastwood had given him the courage to keep going. As for Clint, he remained a quiet force of kindness, always ready to lend a hand to those in need. Though he never sought recognition for his actions, the impact of his compassion continued to ripple outward, touching countless lives in ways he could never have imagined. And so, the story of Jack and Clint serves as a timeless reminder. No matter how dark the night may seem, there is always a dawn waiting to break. All it takes is one person to light the way,